Hi there, I'm Carmen from Adopt Your Clothes, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about fusible interfacing. So let's start at the basics. What even is fusible interfacing? Interfacing is a fabric-like material that's placed on the inside of certain portions of a garment to give them some structure and stabilize them a bit. Areas that you might use interfacing for would be things like necklines, waistbands, collars, and sleeve cuffs. Areas that just need a little bit more stability and structure. Interfacing comes in either fusible or sew-in versions. So the fusible version has some little bumpy adhesive on one side of the interfacing, which is heat activated. And so you place that bumpy side against your fabric, activate it with your hot iron, and it basically glues the interfacing to the fabric. This is super easy to use and really convenient. Sew-in interfacing, on the other hand, doesn't have any kind of adhesive, so it has to be stitched onto the fabric. Personally, I very rarely use sew-in interfacing just because it's a little bit more time-consuming to use, and also, honestly, when I go to the craft store, their selection of interfacings is just full of fusibles and there's way more options available. Now, besides just fusible versus sew-in, there are tons of different types of interfacings out there, and it can be really overwhelming if you don't know what you're looking at to walk into the store and try to figure out what interfacing to get for your pattern. So let's talk a little bit about the different types of interfacing. There are three primary options when it comes to different types of interfacing, and that would be knit, woven, and non-woven. Knit interfacing is knitted just like a knit fabric, so it has a little bit of stretch. This type of interfacing is what you want to use if you're using it for a project made from knit fabric. This is because the knit fabric has some stretch, so you want to make sure that your interfacing also has a little bit of stretch so that it doesn't prevent your garment from stretching. Now, the other two options, woven and non-woven interfacing, are both great choices for projects made with non-stretch fabrics. So the difference is that woven interfacing is woven just like woven fabric, whereas non-woven interfacing is just made with fibers that are basically squished and glued together to form sort of a fabric-y, papery-like material. So it's not exactly fabric, not exactly paper, it's kind of in between. So woven and non-woven interfacings can be used pretty much interchangeably on your non-stretch projects. The main difference in how they behave when you use them is that woven interfacing has a little bit of a nicer drape because it's actually made from fibers that are woven together like a fabric. So it has a more fabric-like feel and drape to it, which is just a little bit nicer quality. However, for most projects, you really won't even notice the difference between a woven and a non-woven interfacing unless the fabric that you're using it on is a really drapey fabric where you want to have that beautiful, nice drape that you can get with a woven that's a little bit harder to achieve with a non-woven interfacing. Now, interfacing also comes in a huge variety of different weights. My rule of thumb in most cases is to pair my fabric with an interfacing that's about the same weight or lighter than the fabric. Alright, so now you know all about interfacing, but we still need to talk about how to actually use fusible interfacing. I'm cutting a piece of interfacing with this pattern piece, pinning it in place. And because this is non-woven interfacing, it doesn't matter which orientation I put this pattern piece onto the interfacing. If it was woven interfacing, I'd try to be more careful to make sure that the grain line was running in the direction of this arrow. So I cut this piece with the glue side facing up, so when I cut my fabric piece to correspond with this, the fabric piece is going to need to be cut with the wrong side of the fabric facing down. That way when I cut this piece out of the fabric, the wrong side of the fabric will be down towards the glue side of the interfacing. Now, it doesn't really matter that much with this particular pattern piece because it's pretty much symmetrical on both sides, but if you were cutting a piece that wasn't symmetrical on both sides, it's really important to make sure that you cut with the fabric and the interfacing in such a direction that the glue will be against the wrong side of the fabric. And on the fabric, you do want to make sure that your grain line is running in the correct direction. Alright, so how I'm going to do this, I have the right side of my pattern piece down on the fabric piece here. So the wrong side is facing up. Now I'm going to place the interfacing piece on top of the wrong side of the fabric piece with the bumpy glue side facing down against the fabric. So I'm just going to line it up as best I can, and of course my cutting is never perfect, so there'll be some pieces sticking out, but it's okay. Of course, once we take our seam allowance, sewing this together, this bit along the edge isn't going to matter at all. So I have my damp rag here, and I'm going to set it over one side of my area I want to fuse. You can see it doesn't cover the whole thing, but that's okay. We'll do this section first, then we'll re-wet the rag and do the next section. And I'm basically just going to press straight down and hold it in place for about 10 to 15 seconds. Alright, so that section has hopefully been fused, so now we're going to move in and do the next section. Alright, so that section is done, so we're going to slowly peel the rag up. Alright, my rag is damp again, so we're going to place it over this last section and finish this out. Now I like to leave this here in place until it's mostly cool. I've just found in the past if I try to peel this up off the ironing board when it's still warm, it might cause some issues with the fusible not sticking the way I want it to. So not worth the risk to me. I just leave it here until it's mostly cooled, and then you can peel it up and you're good to go.